This is a download from BFM 89.9, the business station.
Welcome back to the Daily Digest. I'm Sharmilla Ganesan, together with Shiao and Lim Su Ann. With the recent media uproar after Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's announcement that they will be stepping back as senior members of the British royal family, there has been renewed focus on not just Meghan and Harry, but on Meghan herself, as well as the inevitable comparisons to the Duchess of Cambridge, of course, Kate and Prince William's wife.
And as people opinionate about it and take sides, Meghan and Kate are increasingly being positioned as two distinct types of women, with different people choosing to support one type over the other, and essentially people taking sides of either your team Kate or your team Meghan.
So, if we go along that narrative, Kate is your loving mother and wife, the traditionalist, the one aligned with family values. She's the silent type who stands behind her man. And of course, Meghan then is the opposite. She's the modern woman, the progressive one, the one who is outspoken and knows her own mind.
So it's exactly this simplistic dichotomy that writer Helen Lewis criticizes in an article in The Atlantic. So Lewis is also the author of a book called Difficult Women, A History of Feminism in 11 Fights.
Okay, book club book.
So what Lewis says is that when women are pigeonholed into these particular types, we end up limiting the choices that are open to all women in general, meaning we create a binary where women have to only be one thing or another.
And these binaries are so opposing, right?
Yes.
You can't seem to exist together. These they are usually positioned as a clash, as a criticism of how each other's values or choices. Take for instance what is often referred to as the mummy wars, where working mothers and stay-at-home mothers are at odds with each other. Essentially, one woman's choice to do something is usually viewed as a criticism of another woman's choice to do something different, when instead it's actually just each woman's choice.
Right.
And this extends to so many other aspects as well. Women who breastfeed versus women who choose to bottle
Absolutely,
feed.
yeah.
Women who have a C-section versus a natural birth. Those who have a nanny versus doing it on your own.
yeah.
I mean, each choice is often measured against the opposite choice, and it's typically seen as a competition. And even though in some cases it can be complementary.
It really should, right? Each woman has the right to decide what works best for her and her family and her kids. And I totally agree with the I've talked a lot about the whole breastfeeding thing, but the working mothers and stay-at-home mothers thing, right? Each group wears it as a badge of honor, and it almost feels like you can't have one foot in both camps almost. There's only one way that's best, and that's not right.
And I don't think this is necessarily something that only mothers or even women who are married face. I mean, as someone who is neither of those things, then there's that narrative, right? That there's two kinds of women that people would want to date. You have the party girl or the good girl.
The one who wants to get married or the one who's just in it for a good time.
Exactly. The one who you can take home to your mother or the one that you can have fun with. So, and all of these are incredibly damaging, because what it then does is it implies that a person who could be a quote-unquote good wife couldn't also be someone who has her own mind and can speak up. And that's not true.
Yeah. And there's also the long tradition of regulating appropriate female behavior by placing women in opposition to each other. So that's what's happening with Meghan and Kate now. So if we look at American politics, right, very famously, Hillary Clinton versus Laura Bush, and then now Melania Trump versus Michelle Obama.
Yeah, but even it's not just in politics. Also, if we look at outside of politics, we think of the Marilyn Monroe versus Jackie Kennedy, Jennifer Aniston versus Angelina Jolie, or Katy Perry versus Taylor Swift, and the list can just keep growing. And these women are viewed as women who are very different from each other, and so therefore they must be positioned as competitors. And even though in some cases they are friends.
I mean, even looking closer to home, and perhaps a slightly more controversial comparison would be how the narrative around Tun Siti Hasma versus when Rosmah was our First Lady. Rosmah Mansur was Yes, I mean, we should judge her or sort of look at her acts as First Lady. But often they were just compared in terms of the kinds of wives they were. You know, whether they were the supportive one or the one who took a bigger role in the limelight. And why is it a competition? Perhaps there are many ways to be a first lady.
Also, why are we judging them? They are not elected officials.
Right.
It's quite unfair, to be honest, to put them on that same pedestal and then tear them to shreds for what are their personal choices and behaviors. Not being an apologist for anyone here, but they are only in this position because their partners happen to be publicly elected officials.
So what that article points out, in the case of Kate and Meghan, is that instead of their choices and actions being viewed merely as an expression of who they are, an expression of their own personalities, instead they are converted into being this kind of cultural type. And then each of their acts just continues to feed into that type, even though in reality, for instance, Meghan herself is a mother as well. Yeah. And in fact, her and Harry's choice to step back was actually driven by concern for their son, or the fact that Kate, even though she's positioned in this quiet, retiring, quote-unquote good mother-wife mode, she actually has spoken up on political issues like mental health, like education. So neither of them fit those neat boxes that have been forced onto them.
It's in fitting them into those boxes, articles are essentially picking parts of themselves that would go in that direction.
Yes, and to suit their own narrative.
Yeah, and the article that you mentioned, Sharmilla, also points out how Kate herself was previously vilified by the British media when leading up to her marriage to Prince William. She was called everything from vulgar to a social climber. But then once Meghan came along, the headlines become very noticeably kinder to Kate. So now she's the pleasant and perfect wife and mother, and she's become that measure against which Meghan seems to fall short.
And significantly, we don't see this being done to William and Harry, even though they are also very different from each other, but nobody puts them in competition with each other comparison with each other.
That's true. So to get some insight into how this translates into our own daily lives and jobs, even royalty can have a link to us. We have on the line organizational psychologist Hetal Doshi. Hetal, is there a tendency for women to be pitted against each other?
I think when it comes to women, it's not only about being pitted against other women, but it is also being their male counterparts. So it's a really do if you're damn, do if you don't scenario for women. And this is not a personal opinion. This is more than enough research has shown that women are constantly being benchmarked against men as well as other women.
And when women view each other as competition, what is the effect on women's advancement as a whole?
When women begin to look at each other as competition, it would be there is a tendency to want to fight more, to be insistent and persistent, more resilient. I will just keep fighting harder and stronger. Then there would be another group who would just resign into the fate and say that, you know what, this is a slippery slope and I'll never be able to make it, and I may as well just stay quiet or give up. But ultimately, I think, the worst thing that happens is that you lose a potential circle that can be extremely valuable for you if you're able to harness it in the right way. So I think there's a huge missed opportunity actually when women begin to fight against other women, or actually, fighting with anyone else in general, or competing with anyone else in general. So I'll just share with you a little bit about a client of ours. Once they started doing a particular training or awareness training on the unconscious biases and this queen bee kind of a scenario, women of their own territory. And so when they become a little bit more territorial, men do too, but women tend to have a little bit more of that tendency. Once they begin to do that, so this particular client, once they became aware, or they raised awareness in organization about typical queen bee mentality, what it meant was that there is a huge missed opportunity for women to be more supportive towards each other. And you tend to lose that opportunity of interacting, collaborating with other parties. And the way that we work in the world today requires and in fact demands that level of collaboration. So when this training was conducted, and when female employees understood that potentially they could be more territorial than the male counterparts, what they started to do was that they started to open up their arms and invite any other female leaders, and they became a lot more stronger. And this was in a very short period of time. I could see that a lot of the top female leaders in the organization began to say that, you know what, I need to help another woman out. I need to help another woman out. And it's not that everybody started to do that. But once a couple of them started to become stronger together, and it was visibly demonstrated that they were trying to set each other up for success, a lot more females started to become involved as well. So I think this missed opportunity can become very detrimental in terms of putting women who already feel that maybe they are losing out in a space of competition from a feeling that they are losing out to a feeling that now I'm totally lonely in the process, versus I feel like I'm losing out. I stretch my arm out. There are other women out there who are going to support me, and now I can feel more resilient to be able to compete. And I know that there are people who are going to back me up in case I don't. And quite frankly, when I see more education around this, there is a direct correlation with more women supporting each other and setting each other up for success, not at home only, but definitely from a career perspective as well.
So when it comes to our own social and organizational interactions, how can we avoid stereotyping then and pitting women against each other?
I think the first most important thing is for women, and this is, I'm extremely empathetic to the plight of women trying to, raise ourselves to the top of organization. I'm very empathetic to the point that it is a very difficult journey. But what women also must recognize is that the rise to the top has always been a game of sorts. And there has to be a recognition that they will be faced with a lot more challenges than the male counterparts. And we have to it's not about resigning our fate to it. As the world evolves and there is a lot more equality, at this point in time, we need to recognize that there are a lot of things going against us, and we need to be okay with it, and we need to learn how to play much smarter, which means the more support we can get, the better for us. And I think for women, one very important thing is to keep your eye on the prize. A lot of the female leaders that I know would be really focused on getting the job done well rather than understanding how they can move into the next more senior position and what are the skill sets required to get into the next senior position. So I think for women, it would be, number one, understand that this is a scenario that is difficult and it is not really going to change. Number two, raise the level of support that they can get from a network. Number three, to not only work very hard, but to also work very smart in keeping your eye on the prize.
That was organizational psychologist Hetal Doshi. Obviously sort of taking that idea of women being pitted against each other and figuring out how we can deal with it in our day-to-day lives, especially within an organizational context.
Yeah. And earlier we were talking about how, let's say, women, whether in the political space or in entertainment space, are, in this narrative being pitted against each other. Rushan on WhatsApp messaged in to point out that, for example, here in Malaysia, Syed Saddiq is being compared with KJ, Kari Jamaluddin. I would say, thanks for messaging in, Roshan, but I think the difference there is that they are both youth ministers. Both
they're elected representatives.
They're elected representatives holding the same portfolio, one after the other, and they're being judged or compared based on what they're doing within that portfolio.
And not necessarily on arbitrarily imposed cultural stereotypes, which is what the issue is when you decide that women have to fit a certain type, right?
Yeah. So I would say a comparison could be made. For example, if Syed Saddiq's partner was being compared with KJ's partner, then you again, as I pointed out earlier, their partners are not elected representatives. They do not choose to be in the limelight. You may argue that if you wish, and I'm sure many people would, but they should not have our, and it's so forced upon, isn't it? The paparazzi can determine this narrative for you and this narrative for you, and influence your conversation. You're standing in a supermarket line, you read these tabloids, and you go like, oh yeah, Meghan is such a, Harry is such a hand-packed husband because Meghan is a domineering woman. But it's all made up.
Yeah, it's all assumptions, isn't it? And the moment you have one article like that or one paparazzi photo that sort of puts that assumption or stereotype on you, it just keeps happening because that sort of makes news. It makes for interesting news as much as even though you know almost nothing about what is really happening.
And it also kind of sets that standard for the rest of us, that when we look at these stories and we keep reading these narratives again and again, it feeds into this idea that if you choose to behave in a certain way about a particular issue, that then inevitably you're going to be boxed into being that type of woman, right? If you make one choice that pulls you closer to the good mother, good wife camp, then people view you as perhaps not being career driven or not being someone who's invested in success, which isn't fair because you are allowed to take these components and take the ones that suit you.
Absolutely. I think it's also the fact that everything that Meghan has done seems to be very different from Kate's path as well. And so that's been fodder. That's just been fodder for the media.
Do you guys ever feel like, growing up or in your careers that you're constantly pitted against other women, that you're made to almost feel like you're in competition with them?
Not for me, no. I don't know, perhaps being in communications and media, it is a female-centric industry. So perhaps this, in a sense, you're not fighting within a very small pool anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, and for me, I mean, growing up, I've went to all girls schools, so I feel like there is already a high level of competitiveness around among us anyway, and you sort of don't have that comparison to the boys in the school, for example.
I do think I have heard though from my friends who work in very not conservative, maybe traditional work environments or very corporate environments, that there is that anxiety that often, in a particular boardroom or in a particular team, it's viewed as if there's only space for a few women, and therefore you're constantly worried that you have to be better than the other women to be able to be able to be picked for those roles. And I think that is kind of what Hetal was also talking about earlier, that then it prevents you from creating support networks for yourself.
That's right.
Which is really what we should be focusing on doing.
To prop each other up rather than to push the other out.
And even in spaces like Hollywood, I feel like we're seeing this more often. Women coming out in support of each other, calling out, for instance, journalists who ask sexist questions, rather than tearing each other down, to actually create this circle of speaking up for each other.
But I guess, like you say, in Hollywood, there's a lot more of that happening, right? But in cases like, for example, Katy Perry and Taylor Swift, a lot of time, even when they are sort of making up for whatever they've argued before, there's always articles following about how they used to be against each other, how they used to be fighting for the same things. And I feel like it just doesn't seem to end.
I guess it's always more of a narrative when people are fighting than when they've made up, right?
Oh, why women, right?
Yeah.
Why is it always that? And anyone correct me if I'm wrong, or any of you listening as well. It does seem like, as you said, Sharmilla, Prince William and Prince Harry aren't being cast in these opposing roles.
Yeah.
Rather, it generally seems to be that women find themselves being pitted against each other.
Absolutely. Well, if you have any thoughts on that, if you have your own observations, you can tweet us at BFM Radio. You can WhatsApp us at 018-789-8899, or you can drop us a message on Facebook. We are BFM The Bigger Picture. If you've missed any part of today's show, you can download the podcasts on bfm.my/Daily Digest, on the BFM app, or on Spotify. But first, here's I Want to Break Free by Queen on BFM 89.9.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To find more great interviews, go to bfm.my or find us on iTunes. BFM 89.9, the business station.